for everyone to come in.
Rosie
wants us to record it. Okay. It looks like we've got a good crowd. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Lauren Coogler, the Executive Director of the Community Foundation. And we really appreciate you taking the time to discuss this very important topic with us. I want to give a quick thanks to Mario and Scott on our team who coordinated everything behind the scenes and is making it all happen. And if you have some tech issues, do feel free to chat Scott or myself during the meeting. And so we'll just dive right in. Quickly, we have thanks so much to Dave Clayton, Holly Kahn, and Mike Horn for being our panel today. Dave is the past treasurer of the Community Foundation and our current president-elect. Holly Kahn is the executive director of Mountain Roots Food Project, and Mike Horn is a board member on Crestview Heritage Museum. And a big message we were just talking about right before we got going is this is a different journey for every organization. There are nuances, so sharing ideas and getting creative is the name of the game. And I'll hand it on over to you, Dave.
Okay, well, thanks. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And I just want to thank you all for being here. I see a lot of faces that I know and some that I don't know, but we're going to be doing I'm going to do a little opening session, kind of get you all aligned in the same direction. And then we'll move on to the three presentations. And we're each going to be doing a short presentation on the processes that we've gone through with our organizations for the aligning our salaries with the needs of our employees and trying to get and maintain quality nonprofit employees. So if you have any questions, if they're general in nature, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the discussion, and if you could leave them for there. Otherwise, if there's something burning and it's a particular import to the speaker at hand, I will request or I'll ask for questions, but I'd like to kind of leave those all to the end if possible. So let's get started here so we get the most of your time going forward. And so I'm going to do share my screen up with some PowerPoint slides. And everybody can see that? Mm-hmm. All right, so this is our presentation this morning. And moving forward, let's see, come on. Hang on a second, I got to get to a different screen here. Okay, there we go. So I just wanted to let you know you're not alone out in the world. These are some statistics from a Colorado Nonprofit Association study in 2018. The state employment for nonprofits is 167,000 employees, or about 8% of the private employment in the state of Colorado. There are 25,000 nonprofits registered with the IRS in the state of Colorado. About 9,000 of those are 501c3s that have to file the IRS 990s every year. And total revenue and expenses are very equal. They're 29,000 in revenue, 28,000 in expenses, and the nonprofits have a total of 58,000 in total assets. So just to let you know, the reason those numbers are so big, the largest sector of nonprofits in the state of Colorado in terms of operations are the healthcare nonprofits, the large hospitals and such. So that's kind of skews it to the large side. Now, bringing it down to the Gunnison County area, this is from a 1819 Community Foundation study, and we have total employment of 891 in 19. That's about 10% of the private wage and salary employment, and there's over 100 nonprofits that were online at that point in time. So let's look at the difference. One of the things I want to look at is what is the difference between a profit and a nonprofit organization. And really, other than a few of these things that are on my list, the two organizations are organization types are basically identical. They're both, when we say nonprofit, that doesn't mean that we don't have the ability to make money. We do, and we have to make money to be able to grow and meet our needs. But the big differences are the purpose of a for-profit company is to maximize the return on investment to owners. The organizations tend to be more transaction oriented, with the customer being the entity that pays for the service and receives the service. Customer service is a key attribute, but sales and profit are the end goal of the organization. And valued employees are those that enrich the bottom line while serving the customer efficiently and effectively. A little bit different with a nonprofit. Nonprofits works to grow the organization to maximize the level and service scope of service to the greatest degree possible for its customers or its benefactors. The organization can be transaction oriented, such as a hospital or other types of organizations, but a lot of times the nonprofit does not serve a direct customer that's paying for the service, but is receiving services. And with a lot of our nonprofits here in the Valley, there's actually two customers. We have one that funds the program, that's our donors, and we have another set of customers, that's the recipients of the service. And one of the attributes of a nonprofit is that they are customer service and support oriented, and those are key needs. And valued employees are those that enrich the lives of the recipients of the service and the donors that are funding the organization. So that's what is a nonprofit and a profit-making organization. Now, what do we need to recruit and retain great employees? And if you've ever taken a psychology course or a business course, you may have seen something similar to what drives employees. This is kind of a reworked Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we all have physical needs. That's directly out of Maslow. We have clothing, food, housing, healthcare. That is what drives all employees. You need a job because you need money. You need those items for you and your family. Some of the other things that drives employees are, I call it price. It's higher wages and benefits, and that's going to be something we'll talk about in the difference between sales-oriented or profit-oriented employees versus nonprofit employees. It's what also drives employees. People come here to the Gunnison Valley for place. They like our community, our recreation, cultural, environmental, education, and other things that are going on. They value purpose, and they want a purpose in their jobs. All employees do. It can be greater or lesser for profit making or nonprofits, but that's job accomplishment and the feeling of doing good for the community or for your customers. And finally, prestige. That's recognition internally and externally, and also working for a valued organization. Somebody might, as a professor, might get a lot out of having the fact that they were working for one of the top universities in the country. So for-profit organizations maximize price and prestige. I've worked with salespeople that were 100% or maybe 98% motivated by how much money they made, and with a little bit extra of what kind of prestige they got from sales. Well, nonprofits, we want to find people that value place, purpose, and prestige. But for both of those, you need to have that physical level. You need to meet their needs first, and that's what we're talking about in today's program. And of course, we need to compensate correctly. We as nonprofits compete with for-profits and with other nonprofits for employees. People need to feel valued and honored. And the hiring and training and retaining of employees can be very costly. Having high turnover and not being able to find quality employees really costs much more in money, time, and effectiveness for the organization. And I think we've all probably been around organizations that cannot find the right people or the highly motivated people, and it's certainly impacts our ability to do our jobs. So why do we have to do it? And I'm just finishing up my slides. One thing we're all seeing is a pressure on housing. And this one, sometimes we can help with finances. Sometimes we all know it's just hard to find a place to live in general. I found a site that was one of the real estate sites talking about Gunnison property values in the last year, and overall pricing was up about 25%. And you can see that some of the numbers are just outrageous. That 4-bedroom number at 237%. That's the sweet spot for increases. We see a lot of 4 bedrooms being developed in the North Valley that are now selling for multi-million dollars. But that's not good for employees, and we just need to be aware of that. And then the other thing that we are starting to see is this is a chart going back to 1915 of the Consumer Price Index. And if you notice there, up until present time, there were 5 large spikes, over in 100 years, not very often. And the 107-year number was about 3% inflation. In the 2000s, the last 20 years, it's been running at about 2.04%, so 2%. But it's starting to spike up, and that's a concern for all of us. And the reason being is, one of the reasons we're here is we got a loss of buying power. We all know it, we see it. These are just some compound interest rates. If you got a 2% inflation rate like we've seen, prices double in 35 years. That's what we've been seeing. If we get into the 7% range, which is our current CPI, it takes 10 years to double. And you can see that 13% was during stagflation during the Carter administration. And it only would have only taken 6 years to double expenses. So it's important that we find ways to make this work. So now that was my deck to set the discussion up. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about developing the compensation plan, looking at it from your organization's point of view. And we're going to look at 3 case studies here. And this is going to be, first up is going to be Holly for the Mountain Roots Project, and Mike Horn with the Crestview Mountain Heritage Museum. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the foundation for the Gunnison Valley and what we did. And then we're going to go into a wrap up and questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it over now to Holly, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thanks so much, Dave. Can everyone see my screen now? Great. My name is Holly Khan. I'm the Executive Director of Mountain Roots Food Project. My pronouns are she and her. I wanted to start with an acknowledgement that the land on which we live, work, and play is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe Nations, the original stewards of this land. Most of you know Mountain Roots is a food systems organization, and that means that we have to translate all of this craziness, the influences of the economic system, the biological system, the health system, the social system, political system, into how it influences and is impacted by, and how the food system impacts everything. So like you, we're trying to change the world. We're trying to distill all of that into 5 focus areas and create a situation in our community where our communities are taking an active role in building food resources, restoring the environment, increasing health equity, reducing disparities, renewing connection to the land, prioritizing the health of the individual, communities, and our planet. So I share this to illustrate the scope of the work that we're trying to do. And we deliver on our mission with 5 key programs: farm to school, agriculture, food security, local food distribution and markets, and our Healthy Futures Americorps program. In 2021, this is what I would call a people profile of what was happening in Mountain Roots for personnel. Our organizational budget was $750,000, and we had 40 people on our team. That's 8 members on our board of directors and board committees, 16 Americorps members, their names are in blue, and 12 paid positions. Of those 12 paid positions, 6 of them are what I would call career track or career leadership management type positions. And the other 6 were what I would call hourly, seasonal, some sort of combination of that. I'm really proud of this, but it wasn't always this way. We were founded in 2010, and our earliest organizational budget was on a cardboard box, and it was $3,250. And it was, of course, all direct costs. We had seasonal operations. We were all volunteer. By the end of that 4-year period, we were paying 4 plot managers $500 per season as a stipend. And we had a scarcity mindset. We were operating on a shoestring. We actually had a bit of pride in that mindset, but it was very reactive and very opportunistic, which has its advantages and its disadvantages. Now, in 2022, we're looking at an organizational budget of 1.5 million. We have year-round operations. We have 6 leadership or salaried positions. We have 4 employees at hourly rates ranging from $16 to $19 an hour. We have 15 to 17 Americorps members. And the way we approach things is completely different. We have an abundance mindset where it's value-based. We are asset-oriented. And we have a mindset of investment and being proactive in so many different areas, and personnel being a key area. So I wanted to take a look at how this mapped out in terms of finances, because so much of staffing is about funding. So this graph shows the total organizational budget in green, the direct costs of our programs in blue, and then the personnel line in orange. And it's interesting to me when I map this out that this period right here is where we started to invest in our personnel. This dip is a COVID dip, but I think that you can see the general trend is that the personnel is going up and staying above our direct costs. 2016, 17, 18, those were pivotal years for Mountain Roots in so many different arenas. So I'm focusing on that a little bit in this presentation. We have tried nearly every possible model of staffing there is. Some of these probably look very familiar to you. There are distinct benefits to providing multiple ways for people to get involved. There are people who want to volunteer. There are college students who do need internship credit. There are people who want to do work trade. There are people who don't want to be employees, who'd rather work on contract. There are people who prefer full-time work, people who prefer part-time work. We have tried it all. And I think there's a place for all of this in our organization. That might not be true for you, but there is for Mountain Roots. And at any given time, we have anybody in any of these categories. However, what I noticed in that critical period, 2016 to 18, is that it created a dependency on the ebb and flow that was relative to inputs. So we were dependent on finding people that had the perfect combination of inspiration and passion and knowledge and skills and the time and the desire to do what we needed them to do at the time we wanted to do them for very little pay with a great warm fuzzy feeling. And we were lucky. We were lucky to find a lot of people who raised their hands. But what we noticed was that the impact was variable. We had not an inconsistent, we had an inconsistent delivery of the number of projects we were able to realize, the quality of the services we were able to provide, the duration of the projects or services that we were able to do. And it started to feel unacceptable. We didn't want to apologize to our partners and to the people we served that we had to ebb and flow with the services we were providing to the community. We've always been pretty proud of the fact that we start with the community need and focus on the impacts that we're able to make for the lives of the people we're serving. So, you know, we didn't want to say to those kids, sorry, you can't come back to after school programs or summer camps because we don't have enough people to run those programs this year. So as we grew, we knew we needed to get serious about that. I found these old staffing plans in my old budget files, and I thought that we would all get a little chuckle out of this, but this was the reality for Mountain Roots at that time. 2016 and 2017, you can see I was in here at 10 out of 12 months, and I think my rate was about $18 an hour, and I was on contract at that time. So I was a part-time executive director on contract, not even working a full year. And then I was trying to, you know, bring people up into paid positions. I was very, very proud at the time to pay my program coordinators $15 an hour, because I think the minimum wage at that time was around $9. So I felt very proud of that we were paying quite a bit above minimum wage. I think this coordinator was making 15. These two ladies were making 14. And then I had some Americorps Vista positions and some intern positions. When we moved to 2017, I was lobbying for a bigger budget, 121,000. And this was the year that our budget broke 100,000. And I said to my board of directors, I need 80% of my budget or more to be invested in people. And I tried, this is scenario C, I had A, B, C, D, and E, and all of them resulted in not enough money for paid staff. And so we were crushed, we were struggling. I remember deferring my own salary. I remember my board president and myself putting in cash so that we could cover January, February payroll, because we weren't able to do that. And I wanted to keep my people on staff. Some of the things we were doing wrong at this time was, I think, a little bit of systemic problems with how we were coached to set up our budgets. We were under the impression that all of our funding should be directed to direct costs. So we would budget for all of those things first. And then our staff was actually at the bottom or even below the bottom line. It was like all the things we want to do plus people. So that needed to change. We also, funders at that time, we were getting fairly small foundation grants. And funders at the time were saying, we wouldn't fund personnel, we will only fund direct costs. And so we interpreted that as we shouldn't pay personnel. Now, I've definitely changed my belief on that, but that's how we read it as a young organization that was learning and growing. And then the last thing was, we were coached to create a budget every single year that ended at zero. That seemed to be the expectation. And if you didn't end your budget at zero, you had to justify why you had a number that was positive. And that created a lot of financial stress for Mountain Roots, because we would end December at zero like we planned, and then we would have zero to start January with and be stressed for the first 3 or 4 months of the year until our income started to come in. So a lot of problems that we had to address. We were trying to get from a place where we had inconsistency and uncertainty, we had high turnover and burnout, we had this scarcity shoestring mindset, and where we were extracting as much value from anyone who was willing to contribute to the organization as we could. And we were reactive to all of the situations, both positive and negative, that were being thrown at us. So we deliberately set out to change things and decided who we wanted to be was an organization that attracted and retained good people, that invested in improving the performance, the engagement, and the satisfaction of our staff, that was training future leaders, that was creating career tracks for people, and had an abundance mindset proactively and added value to the people and everything that we did. So luckily, oh, that's interesting. Sorry, my this slide turned out blank. It was a snapshot of a whiteboard and a thought map that we had done at a strategic planning session with the board of directors. And I just want to give them credit because I went to my board with all of these problems and kind of summarized the condition for them. And one of the top things that came out of a multi-session strategic planning was that we needed to invest in our people. They've always been fantastic. They've given me great leadership, and we've decided to be co-creators in this thing. So I came out of those strategic planning sessions with homework. And my homework was, number one, to get more boots on the ground doing the things that we needed to do. And number two was to elevate leaders. So the way that I approached it was to take people who are volunteers and get them on stipends, people who are on stipends and move them to hourly, people who are hourly, going from part-time seasonal work to full-time seasonal work to full-time year-round work to get them on salary. So wherever somebody was in my matrix of how they were working with Mountain Roots, I just started to look at what their individual pipeline was and how we could improve, one thing at a time. The other pivotal thing that happened at Mountain Roots was we decided to apply for an Americorps program planning grant and then launch an Americorps program. I had prior experience using an Americorps Vista at Mountain Roots that I got from another agency. And a Vista's role is to build capacity for the organization. And I found that to be true. I started a program with a Vista running it, and then their job was to build partnerships and build funding streams and sort of solidify the structure of the program. But when I reached out to the other Americorps umbrellas to say, could I get more Americorps members? This is really working well for us. They said, no, we don't have enough umbrellas. We don't have enough programs that are dispensing Americorps members. We need somebody in rural Colorado to do that. So I took a big gulp and I said, okay, if I need this, there are probably other people who need this too. And I will do what's needed. So we launched the Americorps program. I'll give a really quick snapshot to what this looks like for people who might not be familiar with it. The program that we run is a direct service Americorps program. There's Vista, which is capacity building, and NCCC, which is work corps crews that restore trails and things. We went for direct service because that's what we needed. We needed more boots on the ground. An Americorps member serving in a direct service role, they earn a living allowance of $16,000 and an education award of $64.95 for a total of $22,495 in an 11-month period, which averages $13.23 an hour. Currently, that's above the minimum wage in Colorado, which is a very interesting thing. So we launched this program and we had boots on the ground to get things done. The cost for an Americorps member to the organization is $10,000. So there's a value here that you almost double your money when you pay a cost share to get an Americorps member, because the Americorps member is getting the $22,000, but it's only costing you the $10,000. And the Americorps members are receiving all kinds of training. But it's a particular type of person who steps into this role, and it isn't necessarily for everyone. The other thing that I did simultaneously, number two, was to elevate our leadership. So I was looking at this Colorado Nonprofit Association salary report. I didn't find it particularly relevant because very few organizations had under $1 million budgets. And it's $85 to purchase this report. But I think that Mario had given me access to it one of the years, and it gave me an idea for what the salary scales were like. I thought they were a little bit skewed and not super relevant to our area, so I took it with a grain of salt. The other thing that happened was right around this time period, the Colorado comps orders started coming out. And if you're familiar with this, this kind of shocked me, but it laid out the minimum exempt salary for salaried employees starting in 2020 with a $35,000 salary. And it increases $5,000 every year, and they have this mapped out to 2024. So what this meant for me was if I wanted somebody to be on salary, which I did, these were my marching orders. I had to figure out how to fund these positions and make these $5,000 jumps for every person that I wanted to be on salary every year. So by taking the Americorps member structure for my boots on the ground level staff, I was able to transfer some of that funding into the leadership roles of the organization. And this is still, for me, a work in progress. I am still on this journey. I'm looking at salaries for executive director, for program directors, for development directors. I'm looking at that I'm still falling at or under the 25th percentile, even if I'm following that Colorado comps order. And my salaried employees are saying, hey, this is great, but we don't want to be at the minimum. That tells us that you think we're worth the minimum. And I'm trying to convey to them that we're making these big jumps as fast as we can make them. But now they're asking for things like, can we get insurance? Can we get retirement? Can we get leave time? Can we get bonuses? Can we get annual increases? And from one perspective, it feels really good to invest in people this way, but it's like once you adopt a new technology, there's no going back. So it's really a never-ending challenge. I wanted to share more specifically how I did this with one of my programs and where we are now. So Farm to School is a great example. The whole program budget in 2012 was $7,660. And I was paying one person 10 hours a week, 44 weeks at $14 an hour. And then a couple of plot managers were getting stipends. And over the years, I took the leadership position, just as I explained, and moved it from, a little bit of a higher hourly wage, a little bit more hours per week. Then I had the program manager on contract. Then I was able to make them an employee at 3/4 time, at a rate that was still not at that Colorado Comps Act. And then I was able to make the jump to a program director, currently making $45,000 salary. We also have $4,500 in payroll expenses and $2,250 in benefits. And then what happened with these lower level staff positions is that Americorps filled in a lot of the gaps and allowed me to expand the number of people providing services for a lower cost. Now, I will say this about that. One of the things that I think a lot of nonprofits fall into the trap of is saying, we need some cheap labor, so let's get an intern. And the problem with that is that interns are taking roles to learn. And if you're going to be true and authentic to the intern themselves, then you have to recognize that you became a teacher, you become a guide, you become a mentor, and you owe it to them to do that, which actually requires, I think, a higher investment. And it becomes not only more expensive, but it's a bigger commitment, it's a bigger investment to take on an intern. So I think that's the wrong structure for cheap labor. And Americorps is like that too. So when you take on an Americorps member, they're stepping in a bridge between college and career, and the organization invests in their career development. So it is a trade-off for sure. But it has worked very well for Mountain Roots. I also looked at the Farm to School program revenue in comparison with how it played out in our salary allocation. And in those strategic planning sessions, one of the things that became clear to us was we needed to diversify our funding resources. I'm sure you've all heard that a lot. But for us, that meant developing earned income streams so that we wouldn't have to fluctuate so much with the ebb and flow of grants. And that is exactly what we did. And we have done that very strategically for our programs, right at pace with how we're elevating our salary structures. So in summary, I mean, those are sort of the mechanics of what I did, but I think that more importantly, it's the mindset. I've heard a lot of people say that you should not structure your positions around people, that you should just structure your positions and find people to fill it. But I've actually found that not to be as helpful for Mountain Roots here in Gunnison Valley. I've found that when you find good people, you should I scooped them up. I found a role for them so that they could have meaningful work. And I started to invest in them. One of the biggest things we did was follow Simon Sinek's advice and starting with the why. And we faithfully and intentionally revisit our whys every year and call out the reason we're here. Also, I coach my leaders, and I do this myself. When I do one-on-ones with my staff, I ask them, how are we doing at fulfilling your life's purpose? How are we doing at creating your dream job here? I've also been willing to advertise that I'm looking for a rising star. I'm looking for somebody whose resume may not fully express the value that they could bring, because it's not always on paper. So I'm willing to take risks with people that are a little bit less experienced, but that means I have to be better at recognizing potential. And then I meet them where they're at and I say, okay, we're going to invest in you and we're going to grow with you. So I've also learned that investing in relationships brings productivity and increases camaraderie. So when people are having fun with the people that they're with, it is a little bit less like work. There's a sequence to what I did. I think it's important to elevate the key positions first. I had a board member who said, why don't we just jump the ED salary to the top of where it should be and then bring everybody up. But I was pretty adamant that I would increase incrementally with everyone else. I think that mixing it up and leading with people's strengths and putting aces in their places, I've been really flexible with what people can do for us and what they want to do. I have several people working for me now whose preference is to work 30 hours a week because they have families. They're mothers or fathers, and they really want to have a meaningful career track position that isn't full-time. So just being flexible with that and adding value to those positions with both formal and informal professional development. I show them that we're investing in them, and then I expect them to add value too and deliver excellence. We take time to find out what is most meaningful to people. Sometimes it's a flexible schedule is worth more than the dollars. I go to bat for the staff, and I involve them in difficult either or decisions. So when it comes down to, we only have this much money to run this program, I ask them what they think we should do. And that way it's decided together that, okay, for this year, maybe we don't give everybody increases, or we'll see what we can do come July when, X, Y, and Z plays out because we didn't get the grant we were expecting to. It just gets them more invested and they understand why some of these decisions are being made. Finally, I think it's really important to link the staffing plan to the strategic plan, or link the strategic plan to your staffing plan, and vice versa. I will say that you have to invest. I found it helpful to invest in the staff first, and then the value and the productivity and the camaraderie and everything followed. I just have 2 more slides. I'm trying to go quickly here.
Yeah, we need to kind of wrap it.
Yeah, at first I would consider contracts over employees, Americorps members and fellowships, and potentially consider sharing employees so that you can provide a person with full-time work. so that they don't have to go get a barista job or a bartender job to make a part-time position work at your nonprofit. And then expand earned income models, include your program staff in your grant budgets well in advance of hiring or growing the position, putting the staff members in charge of their own budgets and grant writing for the position brings a lot of transparency to it. I've hired positions at a low level with a very transparent trajectory and then worked toward this together. I've worked with creative benefits, flex times, providing a lot of trust, providing food, yoga passes, birthday cake certifications, creative bonuses like gift cards that I bought with points that we got on the credit card purchases, and recovering indirect costs and larger grants. My last slide, which you guys can check out, are some of the challenges and logistics that happen when you elevate all these positions. My bookkeeping fees have gone up, my bank fees have gone up. I have to pay a lot more attention to labor laws and timesheets and sick leave rules. And now I have to have unemployment insurance, and people want benefits and HSAs. Our organizational culture and training and onboarding has changed. I have to manage expectations after I raise the bar, and I have to understand that career growth for people sometimes mean they might outgrow me and move on. But that's just a natural part of the process. And then there's the fact that just more people means I have to have more desks and more computers and more coffee and more granola bars. So it's not just funding the positions, there's just so much more involved. But in the end, we have happy people doing meaningful work. They have a greater work-life balance and lower stress. They feel valued. And we do get more productivity, higher quality services, a growth mindset, more creative problem solving, and we're able to create a cycle that attracts more talent.
All right. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
So that was a great presentation. And we're going to now go to Mike Horn. I'm going to ask for questions to be held, and possibly we may be a little bit, few minutes, 15 minutes or so over.
I'm
but
sorry.
We'll keep everything that we can down as short as we can. So now Mike Horn with the Crestview Mountain Heritage Museum.
Hey, thanks for the intro, David. Great presentation, Holly. As a relatively green nonprofit and just person joining boards, I'm certainly still in the learning phase of my career as a board member. Just cresting a couple of years. Quick 30,000 foot view on maybe where my perspectives are coming from here. Been in the Valley for a couple decades. I'm a Western grad, 2004. And I've lived in the trenches of working 2 to 3 jobs to be able to afford rent and food and things like that. And I've also maybe kind of come out the other side a couple decades later, where I've raising a family. I'm a small business owner, and also have stumbled into a great housing situation in Crestview, which are few and far between, but maybe one of the success stories in terms of the affordable housing program. Jumping right into some perspectives from the museum, like I mentioned, I've been on the board for just a couple of years. This is my first board position. So if any of what all you nonprofit experts maybe have a strong body of knowledge of, some of this still strikes me as new and exciting. And so excuse me if it's old news to you all. Right out of the gate here, David prompted us with some questions. So I do have a little bit of an outline to follow here, beginning with how did we get here? And we certainly all have our stories of how we either arrived in the Valley or, how we got to this point of, what could be considered a workforce crisis and a housing crisis and public health crisis, all really mashed into one, really over the last couple of years. I think we were headed toward this tipping point, not just nonprofits, but also the service industry, other parts of the workforce before COVID. But here locally, essentially the dissolution of the long-term rental market for short-term and the demand in housing and the increased pricing, is just It's just COVID accelerated that process and has amplified the imbalance to really where we are now, which I think is this crisis point. At the museum, the winter spring of 2021 really felt like our first tipping point in terms of, we were really still under the fairly heavy dark cloud of COVID at that point. And by spring, by spring 2021, we saw a full turnover in our full-time staff, and it was really, frankly, a pretty scary time. We had incredibly talented people in really essential positions. They'd been in place for a long time, community focused, super talented, and I think, I don't have all the answers to what, drove this turnover, but the reality is within a maybe 3 to 6 month span, we lost all our most important people. And that is certainly not a good place for an organization to be in. As a board member, I just started to recognize, just how much we were asking of our small staff in normal times. Never mind in the throes of COVID, right? So we were already asking too much and probably not compensating enough. And then we asked for more. We asked for our staff to work on the front line during a pandemic and to, look out for the safety and security of staff. And there's so many things that got ladled on to that job. And like I said, it felt like we were already asking too much. And this was a tipping point in which we lost, 3 really, really good people. And, they may have had their own reasons, outside of factors at the organization. But regardless, as a board member and as a business owner, that just did not seem like a healthy situation to be in. We were incredibly fortunate to be able to hire a new staff at a time when hiring for a lot of businesses has been nearly impossible. Unfortunately, the Crestview Museum is an amazing organization, and it's an amazing thing to be part of. It's why I'm on the board, and it's also why we are able to attract really talented. I hesitate to use the word overqualified because it feels like almost everybody that works in this world is overqualified or overeducated or just what it takes to be able to do this job. But we were able to rebuild the team in relative short order, despite all these challenges. Which really brings us, to the most recent challenge. So we're able to rebuild the team with a really strong staff, fantastic people. Everybody's getting settled in. We're feeling like we're in a good spot, so by spring 21, we had seen a full turnover. As we're getting into fall 21, things are maybe coming back to a little bit of equilibrium. But by late 2021, we were again up against a scenario where some of our key staff could not make ends meet. They could not afford to pay rent based on the level of compensation they were receiving at the museum, and not because the museum was being cheap or not valuing people, but just because really historically we had been on again, I've only got a couple of years within the organization, but historically we had been on this track, like a lot of nonprofits, trying to balance personnel with direct costs, and the museum is not some huge nonprofit. We're a small organization. It's amazing what gets done with the budget that we have. So yeah, by November 2021, we were presented with an urgent need, and that was that at least 2 of our key staff, there was a very good chance we were going to lose them. Within a relatively short time of already having turned over our full staff, and the people that we were in danger of losing were incredibly talented, and it was going to be really difficult to replace them. So how did we work it? again, thanks for the prompts, Dave. The board, namely, our executive committee, we moved really quickly. We evaluated the budget, and we were able to provide some of our staff with wage increases more or less on the spot before the end of the year. It was an emergent situation for us, and it was treated as such. In terms of the timeline, again, we were able to be very reactive, and by the end of 21, make some moves. But I think, as Holly mentioned in her presentation, this is just getting started. This is an ongoing process. We didn't solve anything. I think we maybe did our best to band-aid it. And as we are recognizing that we're going to need to alter our course moving forward. How's it working? Like I mentioned, staff morale seems pretty high. I spent the time to talk to our full-time staff and some other folks prior to this panel, but to really get a sense of where people's minds were at. And like staff morale seemed pretty high, but there's a but there, and as the title of this session says, passion doesn't pay the bills. And once the shine wears off, right, like no matter how much you love your job, how passionate you are about what your organization does, it's still work. Nonprofit, for-profit, stay-at-home moms and dads, it's work. It's time away from family, your bike, whatever else you love to do when you're not working. And I feel like we're just taking the first step as an organization in rethinking our approach to staff and the sustainability of our organization. Increases in wages, as I think has been mentioned by both Dave and Holly here, is just a part of the equation. And for a small nonprofit like ours, it's a very tricky balance. It's a tricky balance for anybody, but given the current state of the economy here in the Valley, it at times, and increases in cost of living, it feels like we're chasing a runaway train. So what else can we do? Again, this is, I think, mentioned by Holly. So I won't repeat too much of your presentation, but these were some of the key things when I was asking staff and others about what else can we do. There are going to be limits with wage increases, and it may not move as fast as we would like. And this came back to people want to feel valued. We know that. And in this current environment, it feels like the value of human capital has increased significantly. And we need to adjust to that. And, beyond the compensation piece, things that were mentioned to me from staff were health insurance, IRA match, cell stipends, flexibility, just in general, in terms of lifestyle, being able to work remotely, paid time off, pieces like that. Looking at the board, how can the board be, increasingly supportive and share their expertise in making the organization successful, and providing the individuals with the support that they need as they're going so far above and beyond in their day-to-day. I think it's also just recognizing that, I don't know if we have ever asked more of our staff than we have in the last few years. And it's really changed how people value their time, their safety and security, and themselves. In terms of, how are we going to pay for it? Our plan is still being built, and we're in process. And I don't know that we've got I really liked Holly's kind of historic perspective on, how it grew from the beginning of the organization to now. And I think, we are finding ourselves sort of on the, in the beginning phases of looking at evolving our strategic plan and evolving our fundraising plan, and really having to rethink how we're going to make the organization sustainable moving into the future. And as an organization, we're going to have to take a hard look at the profitability of certain programs, and versus the amount of labor and resources that are involved. And for an organization founded on community engagement and education, that's a very difficult proposition. And so, how can we turn crisis into opportunity? Just a few parting thoughts here. Housing is the thing I heard over and over and over, and I'm very well aware of, as you all are, of the challenges there, both in the north and south ends of the valley. One of the things I've seen down this neck of the woods be mildly successful is when town is building new housing and there's new affordable housing projects coming online. There are units allocated to essential workers and different demographics throughout the valley. And I would love to see the nonprofit sector start to own or have the opportunity to be part of that program and potentially be able to provide affordable housing, both rent and own, for nonprofit employees in the valley. Fundraising, again, this stuff's relatively new to me, but looking at, my general impression has been that fundraising for operations isn't super sexy and it's kind of a tough hook to set. But in this brave new world, maybe there's a new way to tell that story. And that's certainly something we're going to be talking about at the museum as we look to evolve our fundraising program. And also, taking some ownership as board members, reevaluating our roles and responsibilities. This is my first time on a board, but I'm learning a lot and also feeling inadequate at times, and want to be part of the solution. So can we be a bigger part of this solution? As a board and organization, certainly we have not cracked the code on any of this. We're really, I feel like, in the trenches right now, and in the learning and developing a plan phase. But I think our heads and hearts are in the right place, and we are headed in the right direction. So that's all from this side of the screen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So I'm going to kind of try to give a little bit on the Community Foundation's program and do a wrap up at the same time. If anybody needs to go, we understand we're going to be running just a little bit behind. I think we've had some great presentations so far, so I think it's been worth it. If you do have to go and you'd like to have the slide decks, if you drop a message in the chat to Scott, he'll be able to do that. So the Community Foundation, very similar type of problem. I'm going to do this really fairly quickly. I can tell you from where I came from. I came on as treasurer about 6 years ago and witnessed the problems that you have with turnover if you don't have compensation that is adequate. We went through numerous people in a important position, basically our administrative person doing all of the functions that deal with budgets and finance work and all that type of thing. And I had a new one that literally came on the same time I did, had some quick training. We went through, I think, 3 more before we finally gotten one that's a long-term person and really able to do the job. So if you don't have the compensation, you're not going to be able to keep people. You might get them in, but as soon as a better job comes along, they're jumping ship. And so the staff really started to sense this, and we've been doing the transition. Again, when I came on, we had 2 employees and we had 2 contract people. Our executive director and our program person would contract, and we had 2 staff that were on salary. And we're moving with the changes in people to like Holly to a total employee model. We also know we need to grow. So we're also looking at growth positions because we know we're not doing everything we can do. But we went through a process. Lauren convened a group of board members, advisory members, and community members. And we started looking at really the impetus for it was, what can we do in benefits? And that kind of transitioned into what can we do overall? Because we realized very early on that benefits weren't going to cut it. We had different needs in healthcare. We had different needs in retirement, in other programs. And it was really difficult to try to make it all work. But we didn't realize that we had issues with the base salaries or the base compensation, that they needed to move up. And one of the things that we also knew is our executive director was going to be retiring, and we were transitioning that position from contract to a employee basis, and we knew we had to make changes there. So we put together a plan, and I'll give the staff a lot of credit for it, because they did a lot of the heavy lift and came up with the budget pieces. Lauren, you really did a great job. And they brought budgets to us with what needed to be done. And then fortunately, we're different. If you looked at Holly, she brought up a lot of the service, or the fee for service, the money that she brought in. We're basically 100% donor and very, very small grant-based organization. So we had a little different situation. And fortunately, we were able to take a two-headed approach. One was the finances. What do we need each year over a multi-year program? And we've been working on it now for about 3 years, I think. We still got a few years to go. But that was the finance side, and then I also deal on the development side. We got a development team together that's really committed to raising funds, and they're doing a great job. We've increased our administrative funding, that is our general funding for the operation of the organization, considerably over the past couple of years. And I could go into the reasons, but I'm not going to, but it really has helped us out. But I believe that, in the old adage, if you only have a hammer, every problem is a nail. And I take that in a positive light, in the fact that if you're a nonprofit organization and you need funding, you need to increase your expenses, you've got to take a look at how you make your money, and you've got to find a way to do that. And that's one of the keys. And I think that's one of the areas I told the staff this morning, that maybe part 2 of passion, it would be working on the development side and how to do that, because we don't have time to do it here. But some of the things I heard, I'm just going to wrap it up and ask for questions, is that adequate funding means outstanding staffing. If you don't have the funding, you may attract people and you may not. Think of what it would be like if you didn't have a key employee for 6 months, and you're the executive director, or you're a board, and you can't get a job done because if it was a person like I worked with on the administrative side and the financial side, if I couldn't get financial reports, I was dead in the water. I'd have to go in and do it myself, and they don't want me in the books. I know, I understand them, but they don't want me in there. Another thing that I heard was going from scarcity to prosperity, and really working toward outstanding service by being able to provide support. There is a place and time for salary positions and for hourly positions. As Holly mentioned, you need to be very aware of the Wage and Hour Act from the Department of Labor. They're very specific in that you're a non-exempt employee, that is an hourly employee, unless you meet certain criteria for salaried employees, which are exempt employees. And that's just something you have to keep in mind. And of course, then that ties up against the Comps Act in the state as well. And basically the Comps Act, to put it in very, very specific terms, if you don't pay at least that amount of salary, the person is considered an hourly employee, non-exempt and allowed for overtime. As Holly mentioned, the Colorado Nonprofit Association puts out an annual salary survey. It is kind of skewed toward the upper larger organizations, but it does give some regional information. It does give you something to look at that you can go into It's $140 if you're not a member of CNA. It's $85 if you are a member of CNA. And we do have that available through Mario. If you can talk to her about some information, if you need it there as well. So, in general, it's not an easy plan. It's something we have to do because it's something that our employees need, and it will lead to better feelings in the staff and they will get that, as I went back to the purpose and prestige of feeling like they're an important part of the organization. I'm going to just wrap that up, and I'm going to open it up to questions. And if you've got a question, I can see some of you. I can't see all of you. We've got like 60 some odd people still on the Zoom meeting. So if you can go ahead and speak up, and let me know who you are, and we'll take some questions and then wrap it up. And again, the decks and will be available, as well as the fact that this is being recorded. And Mario will put out a link to the recording, or however she wants to do that. So does anybody have a question? Wow.
I have
I guess
All right, Julie. Yeah.
I was curious about, I'd love it for you to take the conversation further on how to get those funds, but is there still rules that funders want to see that your administration cost shouldn't exceed a certain percentage of your budget?
Mario, feel free to jump in and add to this. I would say that I'm sure it's still out there with some funders, but generally it's more and more accepted to not look for some specific ratio. And part of that is because of this promoting scarcity mindset. And part of it is because it really shouldn't be the same for every organization, because everyone's mission is different.
One of the things, Julie, that I've seen is where it's really hard and fast. It tends to be on the indirect side of costs, not on the direct side. And on the direct side, it's more of, I think it's becoming more accepted that staffing costs are direct costs. So it is improving. I know that's some of the things that the foundation is working toward with its community grant program, is we've shifted over to operational grants from program based grants, so that really helps you guys in getting funding through us.
Yes, thank you. It is hard to find those operational grants, so we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Next question.
Let me jump in and ask both Holly and Mike. I think it does start with an attitude shift on the part of a board about the value of employees. And that's really hard, because kind of the culture of organizations for the last 50 years has been the opposite. And how do you begin to help them make that shift? I mean, you both kind of addressed it, but I'd like to hear a little bit more.
I guess I'll chime in first. Thus far, a little bit of a bull in a china shop mentality, not to say our board is on board with this program and this need, and we recognize what we have, in terms of talent, as well as the needs. I think a lot of it is, we're going to, really have to reevaluate our strategic plan and our fundraising plan. But in the more, misty side of things, it's really just, who are we if we're not, what are we if we're not valuing our people? Our organizations don't exist without our people. They can't operate, never mind thrive, without the right people in positions that they want to be in, and they feel like they can actually provide basic needs for themselves, right? So again, whatever, there's plenty of people in this valley who have done the working multiple jobs thing and to make it work, right? Often you fuel your passion with a little side hustle. But it's gotten so, the gap has gotten so big that you can't bridge that passion play with those physical needs. And I think that's, for me right now, is the gap that we're trying to figure out how to bridge. And that's just part of the maybe challenge and opportunity. And again, I worked a lot on communications during COVID and talking to frontline people during that time who felt like their jobs had gone from being working at a front desk or being working at the museum to having to enforce masking restrictions and getting into confrontations with people that they felt endangered. So our staffs I come back to have never been asked to do more and have never been put in more challenging situations. And we have to figure out as boards how to compensate and support them in those roles.
Mario, would you restate your question? I got a little distracted by following Michael's train of thought there.
Meandering, sorry.
No, hardly. No, it was just, how do you start the process of attitude change? And I don't know if it was you or Dave that mentioned how much more it costs to train a new employee than to keep an employee, but does anybody have, I know I see Celeste and some business people on here. Do we have any data about that? How much more does it cost?
It's kind of a hard number to really put into words, Mario, I think, because it's more of a time frame. The way I look at it is you're having to train that person up and they have to learn competency and effectiveness. And that might be a process of, could be a month depending on the position. It could be a year depending on the position. And it's hard to quantify the loss in productivity and the loss in dollars during that time frame. And it depends on the position as to what it is. If you're trying to hire a development person, it's going to be directly potentially money not coming into the organization. Where if it's in administration, it's going to be a slowness in getting reports and other things done. So it's really difficult to come up with a hard number on that.
And I will just coincidentally, I came across some information from Penelope Burke, who does a lot of research in the realm of nonprofit fundraising, and shared this with one of our local development directors recently, or else I wouldn't have had a stat to share. But what she found, and granted, I know there are nuances in different communities, but the average fundraiser stays at his or her job for 16 months before assuming another position, and replacing those professionals averages about, the cost of the organization is about 90 to 200% of their salary in direct and indirect costs. So I would say, well, that's specific to fundraising positions. It probably is not too far off from other positions. It's costly.
That's kind of crazy, Lauren, because fundraisers especially need to develop relationships. And in my opinion, they're playing the long game. So that to know that the standard is that they jump ship every 16 months is crazy. But I did want to answer Mario's question of how do you start the process? I think one of the things that was really hard for us to do was to commit to not growing our programs for a number of years until we were able to grow the staff. So we essentially, in that 2016 to 18 period, we put a freeze on program growth, and it was so hard because but prior to that, we were in yes mode. We wanted to say, sure, we'll do this, sure, we'll do that, sure, we'll do that. Hey, that's a neat idea. And if you're sort of motivated to help, then we can probably make that happen. And it was really, really hard to say no and to freeze program growth for those years. But now that I'm on the other side of it, it was so worth it because we created a tipping point for ourselves. We reached it and we got over it. So when I was in it, it was painful. I didn't want to refuse. I wanted to expand. That's my mode of operation, but that's how I got started. And how did I get started changing the mindset was pretty deliberate. I mean, I guess Rocky Kimball, as I put in the chat, was instrumental in that strategic planning process. I have a really visionary board president, and I consider myself to have an expansive and visionary mindset. And I just thought, if I'm thinking this way, not just outside the box, but pretend there is no box at all. How can I infect my people with this sort of mindset first? So we actually did like 8 months of 1 hour training sessions, once a month, on mindset, on approach, on thinking differently about things, on problem solving. And I guess those two things, put together, like expand your mind, but stick to the plan at the same time and trust the process.
Thank you.
Okay, we're about 15 minutes over our time frame. Is there any other questions to wrap up? And then I'm just going to mention Mario and Scott are going to send out the slide decks and the link to the recording. And there is going to be a link to everybody for a quick evaluation. Mario's told me it's quick, and she's usually very good about that.
3 questions.
3 questions. So are there any other questions? If not, the other thing is, guys, maybe you could send out, if it's okay with Holly and Mike, our emails, if anybody has any questions, like we could communicate offline.
Great.
Is that okay with you guys if they do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So any last questions?
So I'll just make an announcement. It's not relative to this particular, but to just let you know that our next Zoom training is going to be on May the 17th. And it is going to be targeted at board presidents and board members, but board presidents in particular, about what are their responsibilities in particular vis-a-vis the staff. And so we would love it if board presidents and directors came as a team. So watch for the link in the news you can use. And I'll just take this moment and let Dave have the last word, but just to thank David, Holly, and Mike for a brilliant presentation this morning, very provocative and very useful in terms of things that we can do to address this situation. David, do you want to say anything to close?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to do this. I hope you've gotten something out of it. I think there are some topics going forward that maybe we can revisit on this issue, particularly on implementation and funding is one that comes to mind. If anybody's got any questions, email one of the 3 of us with your questions, and we'll try to help you out. Other than that, thanks for being a part of this Zoom meeting, and have a great day.
Thanks all.